First, a bit of background info. I'm a Catholic, and I lived in Montana at the time. The year was either 2009 or 2010. I can't recall exactly. I was about 10 years old, and I was having a sleepover at my best friend's house. His name is Nathan. He and his mom lived in a trailer home, although it wasn't as cramped as you may think. It had plenty of space. The house was surrounded by a forest, with the nearest neighbor being about 100 yards away. We spent the entire day playing outside, and then came in to play video games. His mom was at work, so we were all alone. After a while, we got bored and decided to do our own thing for a bit. Nate went into his room on the far right side of the house. I was on the computer in the living room. The kitchen and the hallway were to my left. From my peripheral, I could see down the hallway to the door that led into his mother's bedroom. I was playing a computer game when I was caught off guard by the sound of the bedroom TV turning on. It was an old tube television set that made this high-pitched noise whenever it came on. I sat up and peered down the dark hallway. I always found this part of the house to be rather creepy at night. I could see flashes from the TV from the slit under the door. It sounded like it was playing the news channel. I found it odd, but I quickly dismissed it and went back to what I was doing. It was probably around 10 minutes later when I heard a loud thump coming from the bedroom. Think of the sound of a large, dense object, like a 50-pound dumbbell, falling to the ground. Startled, I stood up, and I stepped back while looking down the hallway. Nate opened his door and came out of his room. "Did you hear that just now?" I asked. "Yeah, you heard it too? What was that?" He looked a bit confused and a little freaked out. I was pretty spooked myself. We went to the hallway entrance and listened for any other noises, but nothing happened. Just the sound of the TV still playing in the background. So we quickly ran to the couch, not wanting to be next to that hallway anymore. We weren't sure what to do next. After about 15 minutes, we were still feeling very uneasy. A dreadful atmosphere seemed to linger in the house. We started up a conversation about religion. He wasn't Christian or Catholic, but he did believe in God. We began discussing the topic of demonic entities and how they were inhuman spirits, as well as other theories about them. Our conversation, however, was cut short when a very loud yell pierced the silence. It sounded like someone either in pain or somebody that was insane. We literally jumped up and looked down the hallway. We could no longer rationalize what was happening. Something was in the house with us, but we were only kids and we didn't know what to do. So I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and we bolted back behind the couch. "What's going on?" I asked, but Nate didn't reply. He just stared down the hallway, his skin becoming pale. After that, things escalated. We heard screaming from the bedroom, in tandem with what sounded like a Native American ritual taking place. These two soundscapes together created a frightening torrent of noise. Nate began crying, which made me start to well up. We left the house as fast as we could and ran down the driveway. The house fell silent again, and it was pitch black outside. The dim porch light was the only illumination we had. Across the street, we heard the neighbor shouting at what we assumed to be his dog. Kids often feel uncomfortable when they hear strangers yelling, even if it's not at them, so we made our way back to the house. Once inside, we expected to hear the frightening noise again, but all we heard was the deafening sound of silence. A few minutes later, there was another loud thump coming from the bedroom. This time, fear overtook every ounce of our bodies, and we took off outside, running down the long driveway as fast as our little legs would carry us. We ran to the neighbor's house and pounded on the door until someone came. I don't remember his name, but we'll call him Mike. We didn't tell Mike about what happened to us. We just said that we were alone and afraid. Mike called Nathan's mother, and we ended up sitting on the front porch until she pulled in. We told Nate's mom what happened. She checked it out. There was nothing weird or out of place. Nobody that I've told this story to believes me, and the same goes for Nathan. I don't expect anyone on here to believe it either. I know it's hard to understand, but the truth is that I can't explain what happened to us that night, but the memory of it still haunts me to this day, especially the screaming. I wish I had some way to record it, to show everyone that we weren't just making this whole thing up, but as it stands, it will forever remain a mystery to us. I just hope someone else has experienced something like this, or has some idea about what we experienced that night. I'm a 19-year-old from Northwest Ohio. This occurred in my childhood home when I was very young. What took place there still haunts me to this day. It was a school day around 3 o'clock when classes let out. My neighborhood was one of the first stops on the bus ride home. Therefore, I was back at my house at around 3:10 most days. My sister would have volleyball practice until 5, since middle schoolers got out around 2:30. So I would be home alone for at least 2 hours before anyone else showed up. Since I lived in a decent neighborhood, my parents never feared anything happening, especially since it was only 2 hours. This day was nothing out of the ordinary. I got home from school, played some games on my Xbox, and just hung out. Around 4:20, I decided I wanted to take a shower. While waiting for the water to get hot, I noticed that there were no towels in the bathroom closet. The only other place that had towels was my parents' bathroom. So I went to go grab a towel from there. Their bathroom was a small hallway, with sinks and a toilet on the left, with a shower and a bathtub on the right. The closet was directly opposite the entrance. Upon entering, I noticed that it was much colder than the rest of the house. I walked to the end of the bathroom where the closet was, opened the door, and grabbed a towel. I got an ominous feeling that I was being watched. I turned to look over my shoulder. A tall man was standing in the bathroom doorway. I was frozen in fear. The man had to be at least 6'5", wearing what looked like a war-torn dark blue uniform. The strange thing was, his face was a void, like in those interviews where they black out the person to hide their identity. The apparition blocked the only way out of the bathroom. I was completely trapped. I stood motionless, staring into the blackness of his face for what felt like hours. I thought he may have been just a figment of my imagination, so I closed my eyes tight and opened them again, but that did nothing. The figure then began to march towards me. I made a split-second decision. I sprang into the closet and slammed the door shut. I then held the handle, waiting for it to be rattled from the other side, but there was utter silence. I sat in there for what felt like an eternity. I then heard the front door open. It was my sister. I yelled for her, and a few moments later she found me cowering in the closet. I tried to tell her what happened, but I couldn't find the words to explain myself. After I calmed down, I did my best to try to relay my experience. She called my mom, who immediately came home to investigate. There were no signs of a break-in, no signs of anyone leaving, and we checked everywhere. Some years later, I researched military uniforms and discovered that what the figure was most likely wearing was a uniform of the Union Army. After that day, I never had another experience with a ghost soldier, but my mom has informed me that she would see him standing at the foot of her bed sometimes. She was able to see him in more detail, and she said that he had these massive scars and wounds all around his whole face, as if he caught the full brunt of shrapnel from a nearby bomb. As time went on, my parents got divorced, and the soldier faded away, completely disappearing from our lives. Take from this story what you will. If you think it's far-fetched, I don't blame you. I know what I saw, and my mom knows what she saw. I wasn't one to believe in the paranormal until the day I saw a battle-scarred soldier standing in front of me. My mom thinks he was attracted to us because we were a happy family back then, which gave off a positive vibe. But when my parents split, the soldier faded with the happiness. There are things in this world that we can't explain. At the end of the day, we will try our best to make sense of it when logic and reason fail. Sometimes what's real is right there in front of you. You just have to convince yourself that you're not just seeing things. The story that I'm about to tell has changed my life forever. I was a 19-year-old female in my first year of college, and my group of friends and I decided to record some paranormal activity in the cemetery behind the campus. The cemetery was no longer an active burial site and sat abandoned for the most part. My boyfriend Tom suggested that we all go there and investigate. My other friends Kevin, Natalie, and Nick all agreed. The 5 of us gathered outside the cemetery at midnight as planned. While we were standing there, I suddenly felt chills crawl up my spine. The hair on the back of my neck stood up straight. I could feel that something was lurking in the cemetery, making its way through the old gravestones. It didn't feel right. My feet almost froze right outside the gates, as if every fiber in my being was warning me not to enter. "Hey, come on," Tom called out to me. The others were already inside with their flashlights. I shook off the feeling and followed suit, not wanting to be the one to ruin our little adventure. Now that I look back, it was the worst mistake of my life, and I should have listened to my instincts. "Whoa, this place is sick, man," Nick said, his flashlight pointing towards the never-ending rows of tombs. The environment was cold and unnervingly calm. A thick fog limited our vision as we advanced further in. When I looked back to the gates, I couldn't see anything through the density. After a while of walking, something inexplicable happened. I looked up, and there was nobody there. Somehow I had gotten separated from the group, and I began to panic. "Tom? Kevin? Natalie? Where are you guys?" I yelled. There was no response. I started running, hoping that they didn't go far, but no matter how much I ran, it was like I couldn't reach anywhere, as if I were trapped in some kind of loop. I took out my cell phone to call them, but surprisingly, there was no signal. So I looked around me with my flashlight, and all I could see were graves upon graves. Tears began welling up in my eyes, but suddenly, I spotted something among the rows of headstones. It was a tall figure, maybe about 8 to 10 feet. I thought it might have been a tree. I went in for a closer look, shining my flashlight in its direction, but the fog made it impossible to see anything. "Hello?" I asked, in case it was one of my friends in a costume trying to prank me. I then noticed something that shook me to my core. The figure didn't seem to have feet. It was a black mass hovering in midair. I slowly stepped back, beads of sweat breaking out on my forehead, my heart pounding in my chest. Something then grabbed my foot, and I fell on my back. When I looked towards my feet, I swear to God, I saw a hand retracting into the ground. It was only a quick glance, but I know what I saw. When I looked back up, the mysterious figure was gone. I got up and ran back the way I came. I just wanted out of this place. If somehow I could escape alive, I'd never even think about visiting again. I didn't know where my friends were, and call me selfish, but in that moment I didn't care. I was just terrified. A cacophony of screaming, whispering, talking, and laughing came from beyond the fog, as if I was being mocked. Tears began running down my cheeks as I tried to escape the endless graveyard. But no matter how far or how fast I ran, I was met with the same never-ending rows of headstones and crosses. Soon, Exhaustion overtook me, and I felt my eyes getting heavy. The last thing I felt was my body falling on the cold ground before I blacked out. I thought I was dead, but I slowly opened my eyes and found myself laying outside the cemetery fence. It was still dark out, and the only sound was the crickets. I stood up, and I felt a burning sensation on my back and behind my knees. I looked down, and I saw that my skin was red, and I could see marks left by multiple handprints. I was sure that they were on my back too, but for the life of me, I couldn't figure out how I ended up outside the cemetery. I looked into the foggy graveyard, and I saw that same tall figure hovering next to a tree. It seemed to wave at me before disappearing. Was this mysterious figure responsible for getting me out of there? I couldn't be sure, but I was grateful to be alive. Unfortunately, the story does not have a happy ending. None of my friends, including my boyfriend, were ever heard from again. I told the cops everything I knew, but their disappearance still remains a mystery. I eventually moved to another city and transferred to a different school. Now I'm just trying to live my new life, doing my best to forget about that night in the cemetery. I'm currently seeing a psychiatrist, but I still get nightmares from time to time. I miss my friends, but I'm thankful for whatever that was that saved my life.
There's always a reason to be afraid.